In Washington, the House of Representatives is investigating whether President Donald Trump abused his office and sought help from a foreign government to investigate a potential electoral rival. The inquiry centers on a telephone call between Trump and Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on July 25th, during which Zelensky was asked to investigate whether Ukraine interfered in the 2016 U.S. presidential election, and also former Vice President Joe Biden and his son Hunter. Trump has said repeatedly that he did nothing wrong and describes the impeachment inquiry as a witch hunt in a kangaroo court. On November 19th, Army Lieutenant Colonel Alexander Vindman, the U.S. National Security Council's expert for Ukraine, testified publicly before the impeachment hearing. He is an important witness because he heard the call between Trump and Zelensky in real time at the White House.
I was concerned by the call. What I heard was inappropriate, and I reported my concerns to Mr. Eisenberg. It is improper for the President of the United States to demand a foreign government investigate a U.S. citizen and a political opponent. It was also clear that if Ukraine pursued an investigation into the 2016 elections, the Bidens and Burisma, it would be interpreted as a partisan play. This would undoubtedly result in Ukraine losing bipartisan support, undermining U.S. national security, and advancing Russia's strategic objectives in the region.
Vindman also dismissed Trump's assertion that Ukraine may have meddled in the 2016 election, calling it a Russian narrative that Russian President Vladimir Putin has promoted. Allies of Trump have questioned the loyalty of Vindman, a decorated Iraq War veteran who emigrated to the United States from Soviet Ukraine when he was 3 years of age. Former U.S. Special Envoy to Ukraine, Kurt Volker, and former senior National Security Council official Tim Morrison also testified before the Congressional Impeachment Panel on November 19th. Volker appeared to alter certain aspects of his closed-door testimony he gave earlier. In particular, he said that only recently did he realize that the Ukrainian energy firm Burisma was linked to Joe Biden's son Hunter, who was on the company's board of directors.
Third, I did not understand that others believed that any investigation of the Ukrainian company Burisma, which had a history of accusations of corruption, was tantamount to investigating Vice President Biden. I drew a sharp distinction between the two. In hindsight, I now understand that others saw the idea of investigating possible corruption involving the Ukrainian company Burisma as equivalent to investigating former Vice President Biden. I saw them as very different, the former being appropriate and unremarkable, the latter being unacceptable.
Trump ordered his acting chief of staff to withhold almost $400 million in congressionally approved military aid for Ukraine a week before his phone call with Zelensky. Both Morrison and Volker described a parallel track of diplomacy in Ukraine meant to find incriminating information on the Bidens. They have described their unease about the influence of Rudy Giuliani, the former mayor of New York and Trump's personal lawyer, who was giving Trump a very negative assessment of Ukraine, at odds with the position of the U.S. Department of State.
The president was very skeptical. Given Ukraine's history of corruption, that's understandable. He said that Ukraine was a corrupt country full of terrible people. He said, "They tried to take me down." In the course of that conversation, he referenced conversations with Mayor Giuliani. It was clear to me that despite the positive news and recommendations being conveyed by this official delegation about the new president, President Trump had a deeply rooted negative view on Ukraine rooted in the past. He was receiving other information from other sources, including Mayor Giuliani, that was more negative, causing him to retain this negative view.
In his testimony, Tim Morrison said he did not think anything illegal was discussed during the call between Trump and Zelensky. However, he said he tried to restrict access to the transcript of the phone call over concerns of how its disclosure would be received in Washington.
As I stated during my deposition, I feared at the time of the call on July 25th how its disclosure would play in Washington's political climate. My fears have been realized. I understand the gravity of these proceedings, but I beg you not to lose sight of the military conflict underway in eastern Ukraine today, the ongoing illegal occupation of Crimea, and the importance of reform of Ukraine's politics and economy.
The most anticipated testimony of the hearings so far will happen on Wednesday, November 20th, when U.S. Ambassador to the EU, Gordon Sondland, is scheduled to appear. He is expected to be asked how his testimony has changed during the investigation, his telephone conversation with Trump on July 26th, overheard in a Ukrainian restaurant, and exactly what sort of instructions he received from Trump. Sondland's testimony begins at 4 p.m. Kyiv time.